Australians now have a full range of emissions reduction targets by 2030 from 2005 levels to choose from at the next election. Basically, you can pick your level of concern about climate change and what you want done about it. The softest policy is the Coalition's commitment of 26 to 28% by 2030, which it's refusing to change. The next two are not exactly promises. 30% is the government's main forecast, and 35% is the stretch forecast, if unknown technology advances come to fruition. Naturally, that's now become the government's main forecast. 43% is the Labor Party's commitment, using the government's 30% forecast as a starting point and adding 13% with its policies. 50% is the New South Wales Liberal government's target, and most other governments around the world, as well as business groups like the Business Council of Australia. And way down at the bottom is the Greens policy, for those who are very worried and really want something done, 75%. And finally, here's what emissions have actually done since 2005. As you can see, it's basically on track for 30 to 35% by 2030. They're also all committed to net zero by 2050, so theoretically all the lines join up at the end with varying gradients like this. The trouble is, we're talking about net zero, not zero emissions. That is, we can have some as long as they're offset by planting trees and removing carbon from the atmosphere, but nobody has any clue how much of that is likely to be possible. The emissions could be like this, or something higher or lower. So everyone signed a net zero blank cheque because nobody really knows what offsets the technology will provide by 2050. For example, whether sucking carbon out of the air will actually work at scale by then. But to be honest, it's all irrelevant. Greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere. It's not a year-by-year proposition. The proper way to look at preventing global warming is through a carbon emissions budget over time, not each year, because it builds up. The last official government estimate of Australia's share of the global budget was published in 2014 by the Climate Change Authority, and it covered the years from 2013 to 2050. 10.1 billion tonnes, that's our budget. That's how much carbon Australia can put into the atmosphere over those 37 years while doing our bit to keep the rising global temperatures to 2 degrees above the pre-industrial age. And Australia is on track to spend that budget by 2033, 17 years ahead of time. But after Glasgow, the new target is actually 1.5 degrees of warming, not 2 degrees. Scientists tell us that 2 degrees of warming will still be really bad. Lots of bushfires and floods, 50-degree days, and maybe a dead Great Barrier Reef. So the focus now is on keeping it to 1.5 degrees of warming, not 2 degrees. To achieve that, our share of the global budget is 3.5 billion tonnes, and we'll spend that in 7 years by 2028. For 1.5 degrees, we'd have to cut emissions by 75% by 2030, not 26 to 28%, or 43 or 50%. And we'd have to be net zero by 2035. So the real question for the next election is, do we feel lucky? Or do we?